Hey everybody, this is Carter and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series featuring writers talking to writers. I launched this thing a few years ago, and we discussed it in today's episode, just the number of connections, the number of relationships that I've cultivated by just simply having guests on the show and just talking about the act of writing. And, I try to record once a week, sometimes it's twice a week, and that gets feels a little bit much to me. And I will say there are times when I'm like, oh, I've got to go do this episode now, and this person's coming on. And life is full, I'm busy, and I've got to go do this. And sometimes it does feel like before I record, sometimes it feels like, okay, this is going to take a lot of work or whatever it is. And then I start talking to people and I'm like, I could just talk to you about writing all day long. And I hope that comes through as to you listeners out there, that it's just, the love of writing, the idea that this isn't scripted at all. I don't have questions prepared in advance. And I just get swept into conversations about the craft. And I hope that exuberance comes through. I hope that whatever learnings that we've been able to cultivate come through. And I say all this because my guest today and I had, I feel like a very kind of metaphysical conversation about the act of writing, the publishing journey, and just kind of what it does to us, both as humans who are continuing to mature and grow, and our spirituality, for whatever that's worth. So with that being said, today on the show, I had Emily Jon Tobias. So Emily is a poet. She's a writer of short fiction. She's a novelist in practice, if not yet published in terms of standalone novels. But I know her works have been featured in just a number of different literary journals, and her debut book is a collection of short fiction titled Monarch, which was released by Black Lawrence Press earlier in 2024. And her journey to get this book done, it was a multi-year process, and I'm trying to remember, but I think she said it was something like 6 years, that included the necessity of her getting sober in 2015, included many pitfalls, not the least of which was COVID, and in publishers going out of business. So it's a process, but this process of publishing isn't so much about, hey, it got rejected, or hey, it got accepted, let's move on to the next one. It's a real defining moment in one's life, and it does, I think, kind of inform decisions that you make thereafter in terms of who you want to be as a writer, who you are as a writer, what is your why as writing, because all those things are fluid and can change. And once you get to the place where you have a book on a bookshelf, it is, as we called it in the episode, a line of demarcation and a real meaningful event, regardless if your book sells 1 million copies or 5 copies. And it is a little bit of a spiritual awakening. So we were kind of talking about that for some time, and Emily certainly reflected on kind of her own struggles with addiction, and then that how that informed her writing, or certainly for years it sounds like how it kind of stifled her writing, and how coming out of that, the writing just really took over. You realize, and I think in a way, as writers, and I think she put it like this as well, it's like this need to write, like we have to get it out of us, and you might even say there is some kind of addiction there as well, but hopefully a healthy one. But anyway, it was a wide-ranging conversation, and it ended up with a beautiful making it up story using a sentence from Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. You're going to like this one, folks. This is my conversation with Emily Jon Tobias.
Yes.
Where I grew up in Westlake Village, Thousand Oaks area.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm in Dana Point, which is South Orange County.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You been
for
there
now.
all your life, or?
No, no, I'm from Wisconsin originally,
Okay. Okay.
and I did a lot of running around, and
Okay.
yeah, and I landed here about nine. It's almost been 9 years, so
Yeah, it's
yeah, I've been
I'm
in
in
California most of my adult life, which is funny.
and you yeah, it's a tough state, I think. Yeah, I have a lot of friends who still live there. I'm in Colorado. Um, and just knowing a little bit about Wisconsin being definitely a slower pace of life than Southern California. It's
Yes,
I'm sure it's an adjustment. I mean, when I go back, which is pretty infrequently, I like it, but Southern California to me is a little overwhelming. And maybe that's a
it's
reflection of my
super
age.
overwhelming. It is. I never have felt like I fully sort of I don't really belong here much.
Yeah.
And but just life had its way with me, and this is where I ended up for now. But yeah, it's overwhinging, it's fast paced. I'm not, so yeah,
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
it.
Hey, congrats on the I know it was earlier this year, but congrats on the book launch. That's pretty exciting stuff.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's been quite the journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I think every writer who is eventually published, it's a I think journey is the best way to describe it because it's not a throwaway thing that just happens quietly in the background. It's like a major, regardless of what the outcome of the launch is, it's a major upheaval in a good way of a writer's life because it's kind of this. I don't know. I think everyone's different, but I think how you frame it mentally, the way that I look at because it was such a journey for me to get my first book published after
Mhm.
three didn't get published.
Yeah.
It's just this line of demarcation in your life of like the before and after, regardless of what happens. It's like
Yes.
you're kind of a different person, not to make it sound too big of a deal, but you kind of are, right?
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
It tested me and the process of actually publishing. So, so there's the process of writing, which was the hardest thing I had done, beyond getting sober in 2015. It
Hmm.
was the second hardest thing. But the actual journey to publish the book was a whole level of skill set that didn't that I wasn't really prepared for and didn't know much about. So I had to really teach myself, and it was very challenging in so many ways that I had never been challenged before. And
Yeah.
a lot of we really have to sort of trust ourselves and trust our peers and our mentors.
Right.
It's a whole thing. So I actually, I learned so much along the way that I teach workshops about small press publishing because,
Mhm. Oh, great.
we don't learn about this in graduate school.
Right.
We don't
Right.
learn about the business. So, it's hard for us as writers to become entrepreneurs, I think. But
Yeah.
so yes, it was
That's
definitely challenging.
I think that, I want to kind of stay on this line, this topic for a little bit, and then I want to kind of go back and kind of hear a little bit about your inception as a writer, your progression as a writer. But you are so right, and it heartens me to hear that you're teaching about small press publishing because you're right, and I've heard this echoed time and time again from, and I believe you have an MFA, correct?
Yeah.
From MFA graduates. Yeah, I hear mixed reviews about the experience, mostly positive. But one thing I always hear is they don't teach you about not only about the nuances or the fact of publishing, but just about the industry in general, the chances, the money, or the
Yeah.
lack thereof. And so you're right; it is a different skill set because you're sitting there as a writer and all you know is the writing part until you get published, and then you realize, and even if you are being traditionally published where obviously you're not doing most of the legwork, there's still legwork that might not be a skill set that you have to do. meaning social media, meaning going through the editorial process with an editor and trying to see things from a saleability standpoint. I mean, it's just, being a corporate team player in a way.
Yes.
So where were some of your, like, what was surprising to you? Where were some struggles?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, first on the biggest struggle for me is that I wasn't familiar with reading contracts or dealing with publishers at all.
Right. So you
So
went
I
into this
had
unagented.
unagented.
Got it.
That was actually the first big struggle, is because I was
Right.
pitching the book to agents,
Right.
and in the end, no one would sign me
Yeah.
on this project.
And
That
I'm
was
going to interrupt you just for a second, just to clarify for the listener, which I will introduce in my intro as well. This is a collection of short fiction. By and large, I would probably argue that's a little bit more difficult to get a first time agent with, as opposed to kind of more in your face genre fiction kind of a thing. That's my guess.
definitely, there's no doubt that short fiction is harder to sell for agents. And also it was COVID. So the
Yeah.
world was changing. And then, and the other thing is, my work is not easy. It is not
It's
light.
heavy.
It's
Yeah.
heavy. So thank you. So that was the first struggle on an emotional level. It was just rejection after. It was so much rejection that I had to really make peace with that. And I had to learn how to really stand for my work.
Yeah.
So the agent didn't work out, and I went the small press publishing route, and I had I had a handful of offers for the book through small press, and the next struggle was trying to figure out who was right for the book and for me. So it was really important to me to have a press that was community, that was going to honor me as much as my work.
Right.
And so I kept on the hunt, and eventually I found Nomadic Press, who was doing phenomenal work out of the Bay Area. And I was like, this is it. I found my people. And then mid-production, their funding got denied, and they shut down.
Which is, sadly, that is not a crazily uncommon story. My first book that finally got published, the publisher went out of business 6 months after it hit the shelves.
Yes. And so this was devastating to me, because not only had I been making, and I don't mean to sound dramatic, but it actually broke my heart a bit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I get it.
Thank you. Yeah. And I also wasn't prepared for that heartbreak, right? So, but some really incredible things happened. First, I met my editor, Michaela Mullen, through Nomadic Press, who has become now my lifelong editor and one of my dearest friends. And I met other people that are really involved in my closest circle through Nomadic. And then I had to really step back from the whole thing. I really I wanted to quit.
Totally. I totally get it. Yeah.
Thank you, Carson. Yeah, it's I think as writers, we are so deeply connected to our work, and we're often sort of told to create distance so that we can get by. I'm just not built that way. I am deeply connected to my work, and so it was a very, very hard time. But long story short, what happened is Nomadic Press, J.K. Fowler, he was the owner. He met the owner of Black Lawrence Press, and Diane, migrated all of Black Lawrence's titles to her press. Because I was mid-production, I got picked up as a new title, which was a huge gift. They're incredible small press publisher. And we went from there. So it was
it's
the
amazing.
birth of this book.
No, it's a long gestation period.
For sure.
And yeah, it's so interesting, that idea of how close should we get to our words? Because the closer you are, and I think this is evidenced in what you just said, the more shattering it can be, right? And it does, and I feel like I was a little bit the opposite because I was such a novice that whenever I got rejections, yes, I'm not saying it didn't sting, but I very much had the sense of like, well, of course you're rejecting me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good. I had massive imposter syndrome. And so for me, rejection, and I think it's easier to look at this in hindsight, was an opportunity for me to learn more. Um, but as I get to the place, I think maybe where you are, where I'm closer and closer to my words, even having a book that sells and getting a lengthy editorial letter can be like, but I thought it was perfect.
Yeah, yeah. I love what you're saying. Because me too, imposter syndrome. I have not met one writer in my life that doesn't have that.
Right.
And for me, rejection wasn't the problem. In fact, like I was like, oh yeah, it's no good, of course, right? So it wasn't, I was just like you, it wasn't a matter of, I always thought the work wasn't good enough, or I struggle with this feeling of not being good enough and worthiness and all that. So the rejection was fine, like I handled, but it was just the constant oscillating between like, where does this work belong?
Right.
Where does this specific work belong?
Yeah.
And so there was always this conversation with self, like, is it just really bad? Am I just really bad? Is it, so finding my footing on a personal, emotional level within that, in that context, while standing up for some really tough subject matter was always the struggle, and continues to sort of, I think this will be for the rest of my career, something that I have to learn how to navigate. And it's a maturity, it's a process of, I think, maturing, right? As people, as artists, as we go. So
yeah, maturing and just understanding that, when you get a rejection, it's less of a no in my mind as it is, it's just not time. It's not, and it might not ever be time, in which case, so again, looking back at the 3 books that I wrote and that I had an agent for and never sold, I'm like, it wasn't meant to be. And I look at that in the sense of like because people always say like, how can you just like accept books that you wrote this whole book? I'm like, well, it didn't sell. What do you want me to do? But on the other hand, I look at it as like, well, yeah, I needed to write those 3 books to get mature enough to a place where I could write something that sold. So I don't look back on it like, what a waste. I look at it like, what an opportunity to learn from. And yeah, it took me, years and years and years for that first book to finally sell. But that's part of my journey.
So beautiful. And it's so true. It's about time, I think. And I think it's about, I think it's really important that we all, as writers, remember that these rejections are not a reflection of the work. They reflect a much broader scope of stuff that really doesn't have, when in the end, a lot to do with the quality or the substance of the work. And we really, I mean, and I really do feel that that's the case. I mean, it has to do with sellability, what's going on in the world, timing, all of those things play a part. But certainly, and also, as writers, we don't do this for the outcome. We just don't. And the people, I think if we do, we can get into some really troublesome territory.
I mean, I think it's okay to want that outcome, but if that's why you're doing it initially, you're setting yourself up for massive heartbreak.
Yeah, I mean, we write because we feel so called to go through the process.
Yeah.
I mean, really, that's what it's always. So I do feel like being a writer is such a gift. Sometimes it feels like a massive curse, right? But it's such a gift because it's such a long process. It's a
Right.
long process, it's a deep process, and it gives, and with that gift of time, we really, I think we are enriched by the actual process of it in ways that other artists perhaps might not be.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that's true. I mean, as I've said many times on this show, I only write an hour a day, and it's one of my favorite moments of the day. I look forward to it because I don't know what's going to happen next, so that's
Yes.
exciting to me. And
Totally.
you look at something like that, and if you're not fixated on like, oh my God, this is going to take me a year to write this book, and then I gotta hope that somebody's going to buy it, and then I gotta hope there's strong PR marketing with it, and that something takes off, and I'll see $1 on this, 2 years from now, if at all. If you focus on that, you're kind of screwed. If you focus on, I really enjoy this hour, this is fulfilling in my life, and I could totally see myself doing this every day for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Then all those outcomes, they're all out there waiting to happen, and your job is just to not try to harness them. Let them do whatever they're going to do and focus on that joy that you have while you're writing. And I think that's true with anything. If you find true passion and joy for something and focus on it for those things, then all those other extra good things will happen without you having to try or think about it.
I completely agree. And I think, these are acts of discovery and creation over a long period of time. So I think that in itself forces us to sort of, or allows us to let go of the outcome.
Right.
We just have to. It's by nature because we're taking so much time with these works that we create.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's not that we don't want people to read what we write. We do,
Right. Right.
we want people to be involved. But I think there's a softening of the pressure to have one outcome versus another when time is involved in such a way that it is. I mean, this book took 6 years. You know how long these things take. And that's short. I mean, some take much, much longer than
Yeah.
that. And if we think about how much we change as people over the
Totally.
course of that time, right?
Yeah.
It's really stunning. And I feel that I do feel that that's a big gift. I at times in especially writing this book, felt so much pressure to sort of rush. Like I just had, and you just don't
Totally.
get away with it. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And having that idea of like, I don't know if it's even good or not, that is why we do need those other people, because I finish a novel and I have a sense of it, but not a great sense. And I'm like, this could be terrible. I don't know. And so you do need that feedback. And I would say with a short fiction collection, you're making it that much harder, because when you either have an agent or a publisher considering your work with something like a thriller, like I write, yeah, obviously it's got to connect. It's got to feel right for the market. The plot line's got to work. The emotional connection's got to be there. But it's a story, and they could say, it's almost there. We need to see more of his relationship with his daughter, whatever it is. With short fiction, you have all these disparate stories that thematically create, probably more than anything, a mood to the reader. And it's much less tangible for somebody reading it to say whether or not they're going to accept it, right? Because it's not, they can say like, well, if you just change this one story a little bit, you've collected, it's like putting out an album. You've curated it in a way, and I'm sure you've placed the stories in a way that kind of creates that mood that you're trying to give. So all those little pieces really can't be messed with too much. So it
Yeah.
either works for them or it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's a high bar to set, I think.
Yes, I agree. All of these stories are worlds unto themselves, right?
Right. Right.
So that creates a certain type of challenge when creating it, and creates a certain type of challenge when editing it
Right.
and revising it, and it creates a challenge when selling it.
Right. Totally. And, in your case, I think, in terms of imposter syndrome, it is an existential trait in pretty much every writer I've ever met, even those who have really become highly successful. This feeling of like, I don't deserve this. But in your case, kind of overcoming that, you are obviously very well credentialed in terms of your appearance in a number of literary journals. So, there's got to be that place where you're like, okay, for me, for example, I can get to the place where I can admit I don't stink, which is kind of a big deal to get to have that level of confidence. I'm not terrible. And then that's when the rejection becomes a little bit easier. It's like, all right, it just didn't hit with them. And when I say with them, it's usually just that one person initially. Who knows what's going on in their life? Who knows what kind of mood they're in? Who knows if it kind of went into a slush pile, and some intern is looking, you have zero control over that. So you just have to kind of let it be part of the universe's, decisions.
Yes. Yeah. And, and I think all, the points of rejection, or when I have a reading and no one comes, or all these things, in looking back in retrospect, those are the points that have put me closer to my people, right?
Yeah.
Like, it has given me opportunities to create community through how I have shared my heart about these struggles, right? So like when Nomadic closed, when I couldn't get the agent, when Michaela and I were in Chicago at a reading and no one came.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
Yeah, we all have that story, or plural stories.
Totally. And like, I like to share this because we do not work in a vacuum. Writers are community oriented artists.
Yeah.
And there's a mistake if we think that we don't need one another. Right. I think people get confused because our art happens all here. It happens in here. So
right, and the physical act of writing is obviously a very solitary endeavor.
Yes, it can be, for sure. And so, but I feel like the way we build community out of in writing is the only way that it works.
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting to look back and see how that, and that is by far more important to me than anyone saying yes, no, or maybe. It doesn't end up mattering too much. And that I can say only because, we don't know this at the beginning. We have to live this, right? Like we have to live through this, and then we get to see the patterns and the shapes. But that's for sure my experience. So yeah, it's been a humongous growth experience, personally and emotionally, spiritually. All of it has been such a phenomenal and tragic experience.
Right. And it takes all those things, even kind of the not so pleasant things, does, like, most writers should be appreciative of rejection because they've gotten far enough along that they're getting rejected. Because, because none of it happens without putting yourself out there, which I think for a lot of writers, and this is just a broad stroke, being introverts, that's a very scary thing. And especially to your point about finding communities, because I teach that all the time. I'm like, go to conferences, find friends, find your people, because the person you meet at a cocktail reception might 3 years from now play a major factor in your life. This podcast, which makes zero money, the people I've met, right? Like it's opened up worlds to me in terms of community, but you have to put yourself out there to get there, because it's not just about putting words on paper and crossing your fingers.
Yeah, it's very little about that actually.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple really important things for me when I created this book, and one of those was learning to walk through the fear of reading my work. And so
Horrifying.
I horrified. So
Yeah.
I booked a book tour for myself, and along in that journey was such an amazing experience. No one paid for it.
Right.
No
Right.
one booked it. And so it's just, I guess my point is, it just absolutely blows me away how these works of art, these creations can create the structure for all of that.
Right.
And it's
Totally.
remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's another thing I teach is readings and public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And readings are so interesting to me because I tend not to do them. If I'm just doing an appearance and it's totally I can do whatever I want, I typically won't do a reading because I receive reading. I'm usually bored by other people's readings, and that's a lot to do with my own brain. But like, I think a lot of, so I love how thoughtful you are around that subject of like, because I always say, if you're going to do it well, because I think it's a security blanket to some authors, and they think I can literally hide behind my book and stand in front of people and read for 5 minutes, and you're only hurting yourself because you're disengaging from the people that you really want to have appreciate your art. So to say, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it in a thoughtful and planned manner is fantastic, because readings can go wrong very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a skill set,
It
it's a
is.
skill set that we have to develop. And it was really important to me to learn how to use my voice in that way, and so the book tour was not about selling books or I mean, it was about gathering friends along the
Right.
way, new ones and old ones, and standing behind the work with my voice. And I really had I had a blast doing that in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, but I do think, again, it's another skill set that comes along with the territory, just like, these other things that we've been discussing. It's so far beyond, writing on the page.
Right. And I think writers listening to this who are maybe going to be doing appearances and they are traditionally published, they also have to realize it's not all about the author, right? It's you are representing, even though you're paying for it all yourself, you're representing your publisher. I mean, I remember, I'm with Source Books and they put me on tour once, and, I would go and a lot of times two people, whatever it is. And I remember talking to my editor once. I'm like, I don't see the return on investment here for you. You're paying for me to go to all the, and they're like, well, it's really more about, us connecting with the indie bookstore. So, and I'm like,
Mhm.
and I never had thought about that. I'm like,
Yeah.
that makes perfect sense. You're willing to take a loss because through me, you are developing your relationship with this beautiful bookseller in
Yes.
Houston or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that totally makes, so it is about, you are part of a team, and sometimes it's hard to remember that. So
Yes. I totally agree with you. So much of what we do here, we don't see. We don't see the return. We don't see the impact. We don't see, the result. We have
right,
to trust that, for example, if I go to a bookstore and I have a couple of friends that are reading with me, and I choose to spend that time to open my mouth and read from my book, it matters.
right,
We trust that matters,
right.
that's an energy thing. And
It is.
not to get, I mean, this isn't some like heady esoteric concept. I mean, it literally is how energy works, right? So we just have to
Right.
trust that this all plays a part. And I fundamentally know that to be true. And so yeah, so these challenges that, like nobody forced me to do this, right? Like
Right.
it was such a terrifying experience in so many
Right.
ways to stand in that in the light of that. But it was really important. And
Yeah, totally. I mean, your comment about energy is well taken because it is true, and it's an immutable fact. And sometimes I'm working with, say, for example, like I work with Thriller Fest, the international thriller writers for their conference, helping aspiring authors getting ready to pitch, doing pitch fest, getting in front of
mhm,
agents. And to me, and everyone's freaked out. Everyone's scared. Everyone's like, I'm going to be, in front of agents. I only get 3 minutes. I'm like, what an opportunity, because you're not two paragraphs on a query letter. You are a human being sitting 3 feet in front of somebody. What a tremendous opportunity to
yeah,
use your personality, to use your energy, to be memorable, because you never know. They might, I'm the writing at a minimum has to be great. I'm not saying that takes place
yeah,
of good writing, but it might be the thing that puts you over the top. It might be the thing where they say, yeah, give me 30 pages or whatever. So you should really, lasso in that opportunity and use it to all, the extent that you can.
yeah. I agree. I agree.
So,
Mhm.
I mean, you have an MFA, so you obviously had, you know, literary endeavors at heart from whatever time you took that in your life. But was this a thing where, like, I'm going to be a writer? I'm 12 years old. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I was a poet from a really young age, like a little girl. And so writing is just, it was in my blood.
Mm,
Um, and I did study writing in my really early years. I had this dream of, I went to the University of Iowa for to be a poet.
yeah. I mean,
And
yeah.
and so, life kind of, had its way with me. I was, and I'm very open about this in the book and in person, very sick with addiction and alcoholism for
Mhm.
over 25 years of my life.
Well,
And so when I was 40 in 2015, I finally went to rehab, and
mhm.
I went in Seattle, and I was just shy of a bachelor's degree in writing, in from Wisconsin. So, long story short, I got sober and I entered this, life of recovery, and it was healing a lot. And, I'm sure most of your listeners, and perhaps we all sort of know somebody, right?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I quit
Who's,
a couple years ago. Like,
yeah,
I don't think I
awesome.
was quite as far along as you, but
Yeah,
you get to
probably
a
not.
point But you get to a point. I mean, I was drinking every day, and I had been for decades,
Yeah,
maybe not crazy amounts, but every day. And I
yeah.
felt great and no problems. And I woke up one day, I'm like, 10 years from now, I'm going to have cirrhosis and it's going to be too late or whatever it is. It's just like
Mhm.
you get old
Yeah,
enough and you're like, what are you doing? Like, what?
yeah,
This is your only body. This is your only life. Why are you actively poisoning it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was my experience. And then once I had a little bit of time in sobriety, I finished my degree, and I just wanted to write again. So, this writing thing, this thing that's been in me, it sort of sat dormant for a long time, but it was always there. And I actually I was writing a little, not reading nearly enough in my, my darkest days. But once I came out, I was like, I need more,
Yeah, you
So
had finally made space for it.
yeah, yeah. So the MFA was because I wanted more. Like
Hmm.
I had all my intuition just said, and I had a mentor that helped me through this, just said, go. Like I didn't plan it. I didn't think like, oh, I'm gonna write a book. Not even once. I just wanted to be in it. And so I started the graduate school really like in really early sobriety, and it was a huge challenge. And so the most amazing thing about this particular book, and this is all in hindsight, is that this book was kind of walking, or the creation of it, the process of writing it was actually walking me through the healing in early sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I've been trained by my mentor to create my characters and how I work as a writer, we all work differently, is through the lens of, of deep character psychology and
Right.
unwinding that. And what's funny about that is that's exactly what we do to ourselves when we're healing in early sobriety. And so I was doing that, I had me, and then I had my characters, and then the creation of this book kind of created some structure for me to heal in those early years. I didn't know any of that. It was, I just knew it was just one of the hardest things I've done is to make this book. But looking back on it, that is exactly what it was.
Right.
And so writing, to answer your question, has always been in my blood.
Yeah.
And a lot of, and poetry mostly early on. And then the fiction writing became the challenge mostly in, the end of undergrad and in the MFA. The challenge was to learn the craft of fiction, because craft is mechanical. Craft is allows us to hold the reins.
Right.
There's nothing heady about craft. Is very structure based, and so
anyone can learn craft.
Sure, exactly. And so that was really comforting to me. Right. Because my poetic imagery and all, that's my generative writing is just like, what? Right. Learning crafts gave me a lot of structure. So that's what I wanted. Again, Carson, I didn't learn any of this until looking back on it. I had no idea that was happening while I was doing it. I was just writing, like working so many hours and just focus.
Yeah, and it's really difficult if what you're writing, and I see this with, aspiring writers who are writing memoirs, for example, when you're writing something that's almost a form of therapy for you, which I think we probably all do to one degree or another. And I think in your case, it sounds like deeply therapeutic to write this collection. Also for many people who are writing memoirs, especially memoirs that are rooted in trauma, then to have to face the business side after, you're handing somebody your heart as opposed to like, I wrote this story and I've got a million of them, and it's not that personal to you. It becomes it can become very difficult. What I found over time is like the more I write, I don't want to say the less connected I get to it, but maybe I get a little bit more dispassionate in the sense of like, I feel like the therapy that I've needed to get out has gotten out. And so now I'm interested in just exciting characters and weird stories and, emotional based plot lines, but not necessarily that are all tied to my, my own upbringing.
I think that it changed me and healed me. I don't know that I would say it was therapeutic. I think what happened, I'm visual. It sort of tore through me. Like these characters like haunted me and stuck with me. And the work actually just sort of ripped through me. Right. And in that process, it sort of buffed a lot of the edges out.
Right.
But
it's like an exorcism.
Yeah. It was not therapy, and it definitely was not self-expression. It was really none of that. It was more like I had been taken over.
Interesting.
And there's a lot of that's very helpful in early sobriety, turns out, because we can tend to be very self-absorbed and consumed and confused and really just not quite sure what this whole life thing is about. So the timing of creating it was absolutely divine. And again, I didn't know that while it was happening. I know it now from sort of looking back on it.
Yeah, totally. Well,
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
thanks.
Um,
Yeah, that's cool.
well, Emily, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a quick storytelling on our own if you're up for it. This is the making it up part of the show. I've selected 3 books at random. Usually they're all in the same section of my shelf, which is not organized in any great way. You're going to choose one of those books. We're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence, and maybe a 2 or 3 minute long short story. I'll read it, and then you give me 1 or 2 sentences, and then I'll do 1 or 2 sentences, and then when it goes completely off the rails, I will I will stop it. So these are 3 really good books. Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, David Mitchell's Slade House, and Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5.
Oh boy!
So choose.
Man.
You've got some heady books here, so choose one of those.
Let's try Cormac's.
All right. I don't know if we've ever done this with the Cormac McCarthy novel before. We probably have, but I forget. So give me a number between 1 and 350.
10.
10. Okay. This is a brutal book. All right. This is a very Cormac McCarthy sentence. I'm going to read this and then, do whatever you want with it. When he woke, it was daylight, and the rain had stopped, and he was looking up into the face of the man with long hair who was completely covered in mud.
But he couldn't help but remember that there was a sock, one solitary sock he had left draped over the chair in the corner of the room. He could not forget this one solitary dirty sock.
He tried to get up, but the man placed an equally muddied boot onto his chest, shoving him back down into the moist earth. The man, of course, had no idea why the sock was so important. He just didn't want him to get up. But he knew if he could reach that sock, it would give him maybe an extra 10% chance of living through the day.
The man reached slowly forward, just barely, aimed at the sock, and suddenly he remembered his wife, Celia.
Celia would never have allowed him to have that sock taken in the first place. She was always right about things, but she wasn't here. He would have to get the sock for Celia if that was the last thing he ever did.
How long would this man wait hovering above him while he tries to remember the last time he saw Celia folding his laundry? When was that? 1942? He just doesn't know.
He reached into his pocket, grunted as the last of his air left his chest, and grabbed his 4-inch buck knife, which he was an expert at flicking open with his calloused thumb. Funny, he thought to himself, I wonder if anyone on this planet has ever died because he wouldn't let a fella get his sock. We can call it there.
That was awesome.
That was awesome.
The whole visual in my mind.
Thank you, Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
We miss you.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, what a pleasure to talk to you. And congratulations again with the release of Monarch earlier this year. And I kind of looked on your website and saw that you are maybe in progress on a novel. So I'm sure we're all excited to see what that turns out to be.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure. Here's to community.
Happy holidays. We'll talk later. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. All right, that's it. That is my conversation with Emily Jon Tobias. As I mentioned earlier, her book, collection of short fiction, Monarch, is out now. So please Race and get a copy of that from your favorite bookstore or online. And you can check her out at emilyjontobias.com. That's Jon for John. And you can learn all about her. You can buy her book and see what she's working on next. And hop on over to carterwilson.com and you can pre-order my new book, Tell Me What You Did, which comes out January 28th. This episode will probably be out before then. And I'm going to a lot of different places in promotion of this book, so you can check out my event calendar as well. And finally, please feel free to head over to unboundwriter.com if you're an aspiring writer or struggling writer or totally established writer who's just looking for some extra help, to look at my online classes, self-guided online classes, workshops and retreats, as well as one-on-one writing coaching. Friends, that is it for now. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. I appreciate you watching and or listening. Another episode out just next week. Happy holidays. Take care.